Mark and Linda met in the summer of 1975, a season of warm breezes and soft sunsets. Mark was fresh out of college, full of dreams and ambition, while Linda had just started teaching at the local elementary school. Their first meeting was nothing extraordinary. Mark's car had broken down near the school, and Linda, passing by, offered to call for help. That simple act of kindness turned into a long conversation, and soon into something more. Their love was a whirlwind of youthful passion. They spent long nights talking about their dreams, making promises under the stars, and laughing at things no one else found funny. When Mark finally gathered the courage to propose, it wasn't with some grand gesture or an expensive ring. It was in the middle of a lazy Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch of Linda's parents' house. "Marry me," he had said, simply and earnestly, holding out a ring he had saved a month for. Linda, caught off guard, let out a laugh. "Is that supposed to be romantic?" Mark, slightly embarrassed, was about to take back his words when Linda grabbed his face, kissed him, and whispered, "Yes." Their wedding was simple. Family, close friends, a borrowed backyard, and an old record player spinning their favorite love songs. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. They thought love would always feel like that, exciting, passionate, effortless. But time had other plans. Love changes when life happens. Mark started a carpentry business, pouring long hours into building furniture. Linda dedicated herself to her students, coming home late with stacks of papers to grade. Then came the children, 2 boys and a little girl. Their once peaceful home became a battlefield of toys, spilled milk, and sleepless nights. Romance took a back seat to responsibilities. The handwritten love notes turned into grocery lists. Their candlelit dinners were replaced by rushed meals, eaten while balancing a baby on one hip and answering a work call. They argued about money, about parenting, about silly things like how Mark always left his socks in the living room. But love didn't leave them. It simply changed shape. Mark still made Linda coffee every morning, just the way she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream. Linda still reminded him to take his jacket on cold days, even when she was too frustrated to speak to him. On quiet nights, after the children were asleep, they would sit together in comfortable silence, their hands occasionally brushing against each other's. Love was no longer about grand gestures. It was about showing up. Every single day, decades passed in a blur. Their children grew up and left home, chasing dreams of their own. The house that once echoed with laughter and chaos suddenly felt too big, too quiet. For the first time in years, it was just the 2 of them again. Linda, now retired, spent her mornings in the garden. Mark continued his carpentry, though he worked slower now, his hands not as steady as they once were. Their love, once fiery and intense, had softened into something gentle, steady, unshakable. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Linda sighed. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. Mark glanced at her. "Miss what?" "The excitement, the passion, the way we used to be." Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and took her hand in his. "No," he said, "because what we have now is better." She looked at him, surprised. "When we were young, love was fire, bright, consuming, impossible to ignore, he explained. But fire burns out. What we have now is like the coals left behind. Steady, warm, something you can always count on. Linda blinked away tears and squeezed his hand. You always know the right thing to say, she murmured. Mark chuckled. Only took me 50 years to figure it out. Then came the hardest years. At 68, Linda was diagnosed with Parkinson's. At first, it was just a tremor in her hand, a slight difficulty in buttoning her blouse. But over time, simple tasks became impossible. Mark became her caretaker, refusing to let anyone else take on the responsibility. He learned how to help her dress, how to steady her when she walked, how to understand her frustration when she couldn't do the things she once did with ease. Some days, Linda felt helpless. I don't want you to have to take care of me, she whispered one night, tears in her eyes. Mark cupped her face gently. Linda, I took vows. In sickness and in health. I meant them. She looked at him. The man who had once stolen kisses under the stars. The man who had built a life with her. The man who was now bathing her hands in warm water so she wouldn't feel the stiffness so much. Love had never left. It had only deepened. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Mark did something unexpected. He set up twinkling lights in their backyard and played their wedding song on an old record player. Linda, now weak and struggling to move, laughed softly. What's all this? Mark smiled. I never got to give you a fancy dance. But I can't dance anymore, Linda said, gesturing at her frail body. Mark reached for her hands. Then just hold me. And so they swayed together, not as young lovers, but as soulmates who had weathered a lifetime together. It wasn't the kind of dance they used to have, full of spinning and laughter, but it was a dance full of love, of memories, of a lifetime spent together. As the song came to an end, Linda whispered, Thank you for never letting go. Mark pressed a kiss to her forehead. I never will. Years later, after Linda was gone, Mark still sat on their porch, watching the sunset over her favorite garden. Their house was quieter now, but love still lingered. In the roses she planted, in the creaky rocking chair he built for her, in the echoes of laughter that filled their home for decades. One day, his grandson asked, Grandpa, how do you know when love is real? Mark smiled, looking at the boy with the same blue eyes that Linda had once fallen in love with. When it lasts, he said, even after the dancing stops. And with that, he closed his eyes, feeling Linda's presence beside him, knowing that their love, one that had outlasted time, illness, and even death, would live on forever.